Thanks, Ron. Al, here's one for you. What are some important issues in getting to dialogue at home?
That question has some intriguing aspects. First, let me say that I've had many people state that using dialogue is a lot easier to do at home than it is at work. Interestingly, I've had an equal number of people say that using dialogue is easier to do at work than it is at home. The reason for these conflicting views, I think, deals with safety. Safety is essential to dialogue at home and at work. Where there is safety, dialogue is easier to use, and that varies so much with individuals. People vary so much where they feel safe. Some feel way more safe at home, others feel much safer at work. But let's focus on the home. When dialogue is working at home, people are committed to a mutual purpose. There are lots of different kinds of family groupings now, but in all of them, where there is love and respect and mutuality, there is also safety. And where there is safety, people are able to share what they're thinking. They are interested in what others are thinking and in helping them fulfill their needs. There tend to be lots of acts of service and kindness to help others. Family members tend to treat each other with lots of respect even when things get tough. When there are problems or setbacks or challenges, family members bring them up in ways that don't cause defensiveness or deference. Where there's fighting and bickering and name-calling, there's a lot of silence or violence. It's been my experience that one of the reasons that dialogue is difficult at home is that family members have long histories and good memories about hurts. They know what makes them hurt, when they hurt, and who hurt them. They remember it well. They also know exactly what to say to press against another family member's painful spots. In many families, family members spend a lot of time trading verbal blow for blow to balance the hurt and make sure the tender spots stay painful. In my own circumstance, I find it's easier to dialogue at work than at home. It's not that because I've got an average family. I have a wonderful family. But I sometimes get caught up in the content. Why? I think it's because it matters so much to me. So sometimes I state my path in ways that are too strong, and I don't encourage testing. I don't ask or listen with much power. Why? Because at that moment, I just know I'm right. I'm the dad. That's how I was treated when I was a kid. I've told myself all kinds of stories that this or that teenage child needs to hear my point of view so they don't make some miserable mistake, and I'm sure of it. I don't attack or label very often, almost never, but I can become controlling. My point here is that I, like many dads and moms, sometimes use my worst skills when things matter most. And now and then I have the V8 juice experience. I work on it. My wife helps me, my children help me, and I've gotten better. About 2 years ago, something very, very tender happened. I had trained a large group of managers and professionals. One had shared with me that his style under stress was to move toward violence at home. He wasn't happy about this. So he made a plan, and we talked about it, and I helped him make it more specific. I didn't see him again for about 8 months, and then we met one day on a city street on the sidewalk. We did the small talk thing for a while, and then he asked me if I'd like to know how he was doing in improving his dialogue. I assured him that I was very interested. He moved close so that he was whispering in my ear, close enough that I couldn't see his face, and he said, "I still yell and call my kids some horrible names once in a great while, but I haven't hit my kids, not one of them, in 8 months." For him and for his family, that was great progress. He could see it, and he could do it, and he knew where he still needed to make progress. One final point out of the many points that could be made. Let's talk about silence at home. Some families value harmony and getting along so much that they don't bring up any subject that might cause any hurt feelings. They think that by being silent, not hurting anybody's feelings, that they are being peacemakers. For too many families, as my friend taught me, they are being problem hiders, not peacemakers. These problems don't go away because they are ignored. So family members are making a sucker's choice. They are saying that they can be nice and quiet, but not honest. I found that families need to do both. Couples need to do both. And when they all get better at making things safe, they can be nice and be candid and deal with some of the issues that will only get better if family members put them on the table and deal with them.
Okay, Carrie, we'll give you the last question. Now it's a boss you've got a crucial conversation with. How do all these skills come together in, let's say, giving upward feedback? Say I've got a boss with a really oppressive leadership style. Any thoughts?
Let me start with a warning. While it's true that dialogue can help in most situations, bosses included, it may not help with every person. There are individuals who simply won't play by the rules. I say this because I certainly don't want to set people up to take unnecessary chances or to get into trouble. We've all heard of cases where individuals have attended a seminar or maybe read a book and then tried out the new technique only to get into trouble. For instance, I once talked with a fellow who had read a book that suggested that if you've never been fired in your career, you haven't taken enough chances. He then went out and started doing things that might get him fired. And guess what? He got fired. We don't want people going out and doing crazy things. Dialogue is supposed to help, not cause disasters. So, do you do something or not? At the end of a dialogue training seminar, when people start in with, "Yeah, but what about my boss?" I'm always careful to point out that they need to weigh the risks alongside the potential benefits. There are times when the risks are simply too great. Now, having offered this warning, let me say that if you do decide to say something, dialogue is exactly the kind of thing you need to use to have a crucial conversation. And bosses are no different. I'm not going to suggest a whole new set of techniques just because the person you're dealing with holds more power. Okay, so let's say that you've reviewed the situation and decided that your boss would be open to feedback. Or maybe you've decided that the situation is so bad that you're willing to step up and say something no matter the price. In any case, you're going to do something, but what? What do you say to a boss who has a repressive leadership style? First of all, when you say that your boss has a repressive style, you have to realize that this is your conclusion. When you use judgmental language such as repressive or perhaps authoritarian, you've concluded that your boss uses too much control. Maybe everyone has concluded the same thing. You're not the only employee who talks about your boss's repressive style. It's a common topic at the water cooler. However, no matter how widely shared the idea, let's be clear. This is a conclusion. Second, if you're like most of us, the story that goes along with this conclusion isn't very attractive. You think that your boss, 1, checks up on you too often, and 2, does it because he or she doesn't trust you. That's the story you've told yourself. At first it was simply annoying, but now it's frustrating and even angering. You're tired of a boss who can't put faith in a hard-working, reliable person such as yourself. What's wrong with him or her anyway? If you're like most of us, you've gone to silence. You haven't said anything for fear of what might happen. Maybe you've talked to other employees or friends and loved ones, but you haven't held the crucial conversation with your boss. With time, the story starts working on you, and you may be going to subtle forms of violence. Maybe you haven't been as supportive as you need to be. Perhaps you've lost a certain amount of initiative. Maybe you've even been a tad hostile or prickly. As we argued earlier, if you don't talk it out, you walk it out. Now, when it comes to a boss, most of us won't go from silence to suicidal violence. We know better than to come right out and confront an authority figure. That's where the old story of going home and kicking the dog comes into play. However, if we do decide to hold an overdue crucial conversation, we may go to violence in another way. Here's what often happens. Your boss walks up to you and says something like, "You weren't thinking of shipping that package through regular mail, were you?" The customer wants it immediately. Since you're the chief guru over such matters, you not only think the advice was unnecessary, it was even stupid. You've had it and decide to say something. So you take a deep breath and come back with, "I'm growing real tired of your repressive style. I mean, really. You can't let 5 minutes pass without coming in here and telling me what to do. I'm getting sick of it." It's hard to imagine someone opening up a crucial conversation in such a fashion, but it happens all the time. It's the kind of thing that happens when a person lets their anger grow until one day they can take it no longer, and the simplest of remarks sets off the hostile response. So here's the first rule, and this isn't for bosses only. Don't speak out of anger. Don't wait until a problem builds, your emotions are at their peak, and then open your mouth. You're not in a position to handle the conversation well. In fact, you're about to feed the very fear that has kept you from saying something in the first place. You were afraid that if you were honest with your boss, it might get you into trouble. So what do? You hold it in until even a simple remark sets you off, and then you explode, attack, and create the horrible situation you feared all along. If you survive this interaction, you're just that much more likely to go to silence the next time you face a problem, and the cycle will continue. Okay, so let's assume that you have the presence of mind not to speak out of anger. Instead, you actually set aside a time for a crucial conversation. You ask if you can talk in private, and now you have an actual appointment. This way, you're much more likely to be calm and in control. This is going to sound weird, but if you're about to have a crucial conversation, and one with your boss no less, I'd practice. Either sit down with a friend and rehearse what you're going to say, or at least write out what you think might work. If you have people at work you can trust, not only can you practice with them, but they can give you feedback. Hopefully, if they've been through dialogue training, they'll give you well-informed advice. What should you practice and then eventually do and say? Obviously, since this is about what the other person is doing, including the story you're starting to tell, this calls for our state skills. We'll get to those in a second. Because if I were about to have a crucial conversation with my boss, I'd start with contrasting. I'd want him or her to know what I do and don't intend. When it comes to giving tough feedback, I don't want the other person thinking that I don't like them or respect them simply because of one aspect of how they treat me. I want them to know that I'm not sure that they intend to do certain things, but what they're doing isn't working for me. I'd probably say something such as, I'd like to talk about something that you're doing that's starting to bother me. It's not a big deal, but I wanted to catch it before it does grow into something between us. That's a contrast you might use if you indeed catch the problem early on. If not, you might want to try something like, I want to discuss something you're doing that's starting to bother me. I'm sure that you're not doing it intentionally, but I'd like to talk about it anyway. By pointing out that you aren't assuming bad motives, this helps set the right tone. Telling others that you assume that they aren't intending to have the bad impact they're having is useful in almost any feedback discussion. That is, of course, if you think that their intentions are indeed pure. Or you might try, I'd like to talk to you about how you've been giving me assignments lately. There's a part of what you're doing that isn't working for me. I'd like to talk about it openly and honestly. I don't want you to think that it means that I don't respect you or that I'm upset in general. In this case, you're trying to set the ground rules as well as identify the scope of the problem. When you're using contrasting as a means of setting up a crucial conversation, your tone and delivery matter a great deal. Over the years, I've learned to provide leaders helpful feedback by keeping the conversation constructive and even upbeat. Although I don't start out with a big grin, I do keep a pleasant tone and even a slight smile. My goal is to communicate that this is something that two friends can talk about and that it won't take much to resolve this thing. Do your level best to keep calm, collected, and conversational. If not, if you appear angry or fearful, it puts too much pressure on the conversation. The other person is far more likely to become leery and eventually upset if you lay on a lot of emotion. Your tone should say, this is important enough to talk about, but I'm not over the top on this one. After you've set up the turf by explaining what you do and don't want, it's time to state your view. Remember, start with what you've been observing, not with your conclusions. If a problem has been building for a while, and if it's with your boss, it's likely to have built for quite some time. You're going to be very tempted to lead with your conclusions, or your story. Even if you're tentative or use contrasting, don't lead with your story. I once watched a fellow tell his boss something like this. I know you don't intend to come across this way, but you're far too controlling. People are beginning to call you an authoritarian. And you know what? I think I'd have to agree with them. As pleasant as the tone was, and despite the statement of good intentions, the boss became upset. Who wants to hear that they're a controlling authoritarian? Those are fighting words. Instead, talk about the precipitating events. Talk about the behavior that you saw and heard. Behavior is far less threatening. Behavior can change. Behavior can be refocused or even reinterpreted. On the other hand, stories that contain statements of character, along with underlying intent, suggest lasting and irreversible problems. Start with what you saw, not with what you concluded. Now, as you talk about specific examples, use tentative language. Specifically, avoid terms such as always and never. Instead, point to an example or two and describe what happened. For instance, last week after you assigned me to rewrite the code, you described the exact procedures to follow. Not only did I already know them, but I actually wrote them. Then you asked me how things were going 3 times in 2 hours. Now it's time to tell the story you're starting to come up with. I'm not sure that you're intending to do so, but it's starting to feel controlling. Worse still, I'm left wondering if you don't trust me. Now, before you pile too much on, ask them to share their view. I was wondering what you were thinking at the time. At this point, be prepared to hear their side. Over the years, we've learned that bosses that feel too controlling or repressive are often worried about being left high and dry or being surprised. They didn't get to where they are by not completing tasks on time, and they don't like feeling vulnerable when others take assignments and then disappear. At this point, you'll probably want to talk about the frequency and type of follow-up you're both comfortable with. You'll want to identify what you can do to set your boss at ease without feeling repressed or stifled. Now, I've assumed that when you say your boss is repressive, it has to do with detail in the assignment or the nature of follow-up. But of course, you may have something else in mind. Perhaps they're constantly shutting down your ideas before you even have a chance to fully explain them. Or maybe they simply look disgusted every time you bring them a problem. The nature of what they do can vary tremendously. The point here is to make sure that you talk about their behavior, only tentatively share your story, and that you invite their point of view, even differing opinions. Use the same state skills with your boss that you would with anyone else. Now, let me add 1 or 2 pieces of additional advice. When it comes to the boss, several people may join together as a way of gaining strength. Avoid this whenever possible. It feels like ganging up. If you've been elected to talk to the boss to represent a group of people, avoid the temptation of talking about what others think and feel. Talk about your own experience. People have the right to face their accuser. Bosses are no different. Don't hold group sessions where you dump on the boss because you're too afraid to talk on your own. Similarly, don't represent the world. Now, in summary, don't let problems with your boss grow until you become angry and lose your temper. Talk about the issue early on. Start with a statement of what you do and don't intend. Then talk about a specific instance or 2. Share what you observed. Tell the story. Ask for their story and rely on tentative language. Avoid the temptation to gang up. Have the courage to talk about what you yourself are experiencing. Keep the tone serious, but pleasant. Now, will this work with your boss? I don't know. It helps most people get meaning into the pool, and for most of us, it's far better to talk out issues than it is to let them work on us until we end up losing our temper.
Thank you for joining us for these audio lessons. We hope you have found ideas and skills that will help you to dramatically improve results in many areas of your life by recognizing and mastering your crucial conversations. If you would like additional help in improving your dialogue skills, we invite you to visit our website at vitalsmarts.com or call us at 1-800-449-5989 to find out about public or in-house training options, as well as other resources available to help you continue your mastery of these important skills.